Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Tonight we'll be talking the All-Star Game, pretty much the entire show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. I have with me Patrick Minton, the original NBA Geek, who you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Give a shout out, Patrick.
Hey guys.
And then, as always, we have our producer, the voice of God, Brian Foster, who you can't see if you're watching the show live, but don't... Oh, you're on camera.
I am on camera tonight, Dre. Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm going to move to my close-up view because I've got my my Money Green 23 shirt on tonight.
Oh, yeah.
I wore it to the Klay Thompson game on Friday. You know, brought him good luck, so I'm going to wear it tonight to bring us good luck. Superstition matters first in sports above all else.
Let's take a slight detraction, actually. So you were actually at the game, and that'll lead us into one of our topics.
Wait. You were there for Klay's 52?
Oh, of course I was there. Oh, yeah, it was a fantastic game.
So what was that like, by the way? Just share with the audience, because that's incredible.
It was just confusing. After a while, it just stopped making sense. The whole crowd was going crazy. I was just throwing my hands up. I'm like, this is real life. It just didn't seem like reality. It was strange.
And I think something that was absurd, like they had a heat check on him, and he did better after the heat check. Like, if I recall, there was a timeout, and he was like at 14 points, and then after the timeout, he was like 23 or something like that.
Although one thing I will mention is he did go out in the fourth quarter, and he launched like 3 bad shots right away and missed them all, and so he's like, okay, I'm done. But yeah, it was incredible. And Klay himself, it was funny. He knew what was going on. He said after the game, I was taking some bad shots out there, but they just kept going in.
But he didn't. That's the funny thing. If you watch, you mentioned that shot chart. Maybe you can get it up in front of us. But
yeah, I'll look for that later.
He did amazing at threes. He actually went 6 for 6 from inside the key. He basically just missed his mid-range shot. So it's like, you can tell, and that's the question to the people who are like, a player can't just shoot all threes and inside the key. Well,
yes,
Klay
they
did
can.
Klay did that, and those were the only shots that he made, and he had one of the best games ever. I think, Patrick, can you confirm this? I forgot to check. I know we have it somewhere, but is that the best game of the season?
That is the best game of this season in the Boxscore Geeks database so far.
Awesome.
I mean, it always kind of depends on how you do it with qualifiers, because some guy who played 10 minutes might have had a better game or something.
No.
If you do reasonable
wins.
Restrictions, that is the best game this season.
I'm going by complete wins. He won on his own. So the way it works by people who don't quite understand the wins produced formula, points over par. If you look at how much a team beats another team by, you can pretty much map that to win. So if you beat another team about 3 points, that's usually good enough to be an above average team, like near 50 wins, and it goes like that. Klay Thompson,
right, and that's in fact the basis of how Vegas does point spreads, right? The reason Vegas will give you like 6 points for one team versus another is because it all maps back to win probability.
Exactly. And so with Klay, that game on his own, if Klay played with a team of players who did nothing, I'm not saying like played average, I'm saying did nothing, were like completely average for their position, or did nothing for their position, he would have won 1.2 games on his own. You usually only need to win 0.5 or 0.6 to get the actual win in a game. So yeah. I tweeted about that. I said Klay needs to, moderate that a little, ration it out a bit.
Yeah, maybe not do it all in one game. Just save some for, the second quarter of a tight game.
Statistically sound advice on this show so far.
Yeah, Klay Thompson, you don't have to beat him all at once. Although if he wants to repeat that in the playoffs.
Man, when I was in a German league playing once, I scored 37 points in a game, and I had this feeling like I couldn't possibly miss. Like every time I touched, I couldn't miss. And that's a game, and I played all 48 minutes of that game. I can't even imagine scoring 37 in a quarter. I mean, at some point, there were a couple NBA players that tweeted this out. At some point, the guy who's guarding him, where are you?
Yeah, it's
why
crazy.
Aren't you just making him? Why aren't you just committing a personal foul every time the guy touches the ball?
So the scene at the stadium was almost like that in a way. All other 9 guys were just staring at him every time, and they were just forcing the ball to him.
Replays, that's exactly what it looks like. It looks like 9 guys staring at him, going, "Wait, you're gonna try it again? You're gonna keep shooting?"
Totally surreal, and that's the word he used himself. I think was surreal. That was the best word to describe the evening.
Yeah, it was absolutely.
All right. So thanks for the, I mean, we're going to talk, we were going to talk that a lot anyway, Brian. So that's fine too. But normally we discuss last week's show, the poll we threw up. So last week, what we threw up was a much better poll, was OKC versus the Los Angeles Clippers. Both are poorly run. Which did you think was worse run? You all thought that OKC by about a 2-to-1 factor was worse run than the Clippers. So the team with the coach and general manager who has nepotism and signed his son, who is one of the worst players in the league, is better run according to our fans
Yeah, I
than the
have no
Thunder.
idea how that wasn't a dead wash. I mean, that's got to be a dead wash there. There's no way OKC is worse run than the Clippers right now.
Maybe it's
But
just
I
the
mean,
time.
maybe people are confusing coaching with general management because I think as mediocre as I think Doc Rivers is as a coach, I'll take him over Scotty Brooks any day. But if you look at the personnel decisions that Doc Rivers has made, it's absolutely astounding. It's kind of crazy the things they've done since he's been put in charge.
Absolutely. And the topic, you talked this a lot last week, so I don't know how much more we want to talk this week, Patrick. And I actually asked you last week if I could write this up for a post last week and then didn't get around to it until Monday. But last week we talked about All-Stars, of course, because the All-Star selection is about to be announced. And what we kind of pointed out last week is all of this stuff we use to define stars, we basically just look at shots per game. If we want to be realistic with ourselves, that's what the classic metric is. How many shots per game does a player have? If they're above 15 and can score average or above, we're going to consider them a star. That's why players, like I think Steve Francis back in the day was an all-star, and while he had like one good season for most of his career, he was average. Kobe Bryant, as he's gotten older, Melo his entire career. And we talked like, hey, there are things that make players good, and we can actually quantify these. Like the Hawks, they have lots of assists and shoot lots of threes. And it turns out we can see who shoots the threes and who passes the ball. And when you look at those players, Teague and Korver basically show up as stars. Thabo Cephalosha throws up as a permanent star. Another thing they're really good at is defense, and his defensive stats are quite good. So we kind of went, all of this stuff that people kind of talk about as if it's nebulous and you can't track it. Not only can we track it, maybe we should try and get the mainstream to start using that when they quantify a star. Because what we noticed was when people are like, that team's winning because of teamwork, that player's great because he's a star. Maybe you should say, that player is great because he's really good at teamwork, and that's not an easy thing.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder to what extent other sports have this problem. I mean, because you look at, let's take football for example. Like to evaluate how a player does in football, it depends on their position, right? You can't just point at one number in football and say this guy's great, because how do you compare an All-Pro left tackle with an All-Pro running back? It's really not possible, and and I think that similar problems plague basketball. And it seems like to the average player, it seems like all five players on the court are really doing the same thing because they're all just kind of dribbling a ball and shooting a ball and rebounding a ball, but they really aren't doing the same thing. They all have totally different functions. And maybe we should evaluate to see if a player is good is how good are they at their particular position, right? I mean, Tyson Chandler is amazing because he's really good at those things that you need a center to do. You could talk all day about how Tyson Chandler can't create your shot, but the answer should be, I don't care. The left tackle can't throw a football either, but we don't give a shit. He's still really important to the way the football team functions, right? And he's still a star, and he's still paid a spectacularly large amount of money compared to other players. I mean,
And
what
I
I'm
was
getting at is that people in football seem to have figured out that, aside from just looking at raw numbers, they seem to have figured out things like the left tackle, who doesn't really show up in the box score at all, is worth a lot of money because he's paid like second most after the quarterback, I think. They seem to have figured out things like that, and kickers make a surprising amount of money because it turns out kicking field goals and kicking point after tees is kind of important. And it's kind of a thing that's plagued basketball a lot, I mean, the guys who are labeled as stars are the guys who can score and can create their own shot, which usually means taking that shot from another teammate who would be better at it. And I don't feel like even among hardcore fans or even among management that it has really sunk in that the five players on the court kind of fulfill different roles. And even in those teams that try to play small ball, that try to there's some teams that try to let's try and just get everybody to be 6'8" and athletic and play positionless basketball. Even when you do that, you still have one guy who's got to bring the ball up against pressure and make the first entry pass. And you have one guy who has to defend the opposing team's center and those kinds of things. And it kind of amazes me that the insiders, the managers of teams don't seem to understand that those skills matter. Those skills matter, and B, those skills aren't just something you can make anybody do.
And by the way,
it always amazes me when
I want to jump in on what you just said with like the different skills, because we got another one of these. At some point, I'm going to get an FAQ. I think we have a brief one, and I might just get a few. They were called JBREC codes back on the Wages of Wins, this is an argument we've heard over and over and over again. And my two criteria for blocking comments at this point is if you're impolite or you're factually incorrect. And with these, I might not like block you harshly, but I might just take it down and say, we've heard this a million times. Here's the FAQ. But we got the well, you couldn't just make a team of all these guys. So what you just said, that's the point, right? We can look at players who are good and ask why they're good. And when you're building a team, you build per role, right? Like that's why we really liked Dallas earlier. We went, well, technically right now, we think Brandon Wright's better than Rajon Rondo from a purely per minute by the number metric. But Rondo fulfills this need that they have, and Brandon Wright is redundant on skills they have. So that's how you should construct that team. So when people are like, you wouldn't just build a team of Chris Humphries, Tyson Chandler, Lamar Odom, et cetera. It's like, you're right, because we understand that when you build a basketball team, people have to pass, people have to shoot, people have to defend. That's what you should be thinking about, though. And then you look for the players that are good at those different things.
Yeah, and although the caveat I would say is that if you're a team like Philadelphia or Minnesota, you should be building teams like that. You shouldn't care if you have 5 Tyson Chandlers or 4 Rajon Rondos, because your team sucks anyway. So why not just get the best players that you can get? And then later, when other teams want them and they'll give you assets for them, you can trade them for players that you actually need and start winning games. It doesn't really help you to draft for position if you draft terrible players. Like it doesn't make any sense to pass up the best player available in order to draft for position or to acquire free agents for positions of need. I'm kind of amazed that the Minnesota Timberwolves was talking about how we need a point guard. Mo Williams is playing all the minute. And I'm like, what do you need a point guard for? You've won 7 games. You've won 7 games. What do you need a point guard for? So that you can win 10?
Are they saying they don't expect Rubio to be healthy in the future? Like, are they not putting their faith in him anymore?
No, I mean, when you just look at the blogs and the way that, the way people who analyze the team are thinking, they're like, clearly this team needs a point guard. And yeah, if the team had another point guard besides Mo Williams, the team would be better. But that would mean, what's 20% better than 7 wins? Okay, you'd be a 9-win team. Okay, yay. It's not what Minnesota needs, right? What Minnesota needs to do is stop spending on money on players that they don't need, like Miroslav Radaluka, and keep players that are good, but even if they're redundant, like Jeff Adrian.
What's funny is you're kind of pointing out like the Utah problem, which is Utah actually stockpiled a bunch of good players, but they don't have a backcourt. Now that they have a bunch of good players, now you can say you've got Favors, you've got Gobert, I forget who else they've got. Get a backcourt. You really need a backcourt. Trey Burke is horrible. Now you can say that because they have good players. But to what you're saying with the Wolves, it's like when they go, we need a point guard, you go, you just need a good player. Now, by the way, with the primer on what we think all-stars are, let's talk the all-star game. So,
we're getting off topic. I got us off topic.
The nice part about this, for those of you that watched, we started on time. We're going to end on time. We got an hour. So whatever we fill in that time is what we fill in. Okay. So one of the topics we started discussing pre-show, and what's funny, we kind of started arguing, and then I think you kind of agreed, but then I still think you disagreed, was what makes an all-star? So I'm okay with the idea that the best player isn't necessarily voted into the all-star game. That's fine by me. But I do think there needs to be some criteria. So, for instance, this isn't a hard one, but Klay Thompson right now this season, according to the numbers, I think he's just outside of it. He's not one of the best guards in the West, and he wouldn't be one of the best guards in the NBA. But he is still a very productive player, and he put up the best game of the season. I don't really think I have a problem, as long as the person's productive, as long as it's not a fluke. If a person's a really productive player and they put up the best game of the season, and that's why you want him in the All-Star game, I don't think I really have a problem with that. And then you and I started discussing legacy, like does Tim Duncan, who we basically discovered, yeah, just on his own kind of might belong in the All-Star game, but you pointed out he's outside. He is outside looking in, but like, is legacy enough to make a justification for a great player like Tim Duncan going to the All-Star game against someone better?
So I don't think legacy on its own is enough. I just don't, because when you talk about legacy, you start talking about players that have been there 10 times, 15 times, whatever. Like if Tim Duncan never makes another All-Star game, his legacy is just fine. I mean, he's a shoe-in first ballot Hall of Famer. He's got 5 rings. I mean, Tim Duncan does not need any more legacy. So if Tim Duncan were kind of doing the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar thing where he's clearly done but still playing, then I wouldn't say he should be in the All-Star game, even if it's last season. I just don't believe in that kind of stuff. I think it's ridiculous that Kobe Bryant was voted in this year for that very reason. Having said that, though, I actually had to look at the numbers to verify this because I haven't watched a lot of Spurs games and haven't been following it, but Tim Duncan is having a hell of a year. He's having one of his best years ever, which is kind of amazing given his age. Now, it's true his usage rate is lower. He's not shooting as many shots as he used to, but as you pointed out in the pregame show, Tim Duncan's always been a solid scorer, but never an amazing scorer. Like Tim Duncan has not been a scorer like Hakeem Olajuwon or something like that. He was always just very good at all the other things. Great shot blocker, great rebounder, gets steals, doesn't turn the ball over, gets assists. He's just really good at all the other things and is good/solid at the offensive parts of the game. And this year is just more of the same, except better than ever. I mean, his assist rate is at an all-time high. He's close to his all-time high in or low as the case may be in turnovers. I think he's at an all-time high in steals, and he's having a great season. And I wouldn't blink an eye if he was an All-Star just on merit alone.
And by the way, what another great thing about All-Stars we can talk, and I was asking this kind of about Klay, is consistency. He has not had back-to-back bad games, and he's only had 3 bad games this season. The last one was on the 23rd, but the 23rd, the Christmas, I guess he didn't feel like playing on Christmas, and the 3rd. He's only had 3 bad games this season, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think he's actually on my, like, if I were picking the All-Star team, he'd be one of my reserves.
Actually, so why don't we jump? Do you want to do our problems with the existing All-Stars, which I think basically boils down to, I think, what Melo, Gasol. Actually, there's a lot there. So do you want to talk problems we have with the existing All-Star game? Okay, so let's start with that. So I think...
Well, as you pointed out again in the pre-show, the thing about this whole let the fans vote thing, like, I mean, the fans are going to vote for the name they most recognize, and that's fine, but it's actually a disgrace that the NBA allows that to have big financial impacts for certain players because of the Derrick Rose rule, right? I mean... There's the simple fact that if you're an All-Star, you're probably going to make more money later based on that alone. But in Anthony Davis's case, it is a very significant thing. If he gets voted in next year, he's looking at 5% more money, because I think we can all put our hands up and agree that no matter what happens in every universe, Anthony Davis will get a max contract.
And just so we're clear,
let's all agree on that.
That universe includes if Anthony Davis tomorrow were to have an injury that ended him for this season, and at the end of the season, they had to make the decision, take a gamble on Anthony Davis and give him a max contract. He gets Grant Hilled, right? He's still going to get a max deal.
Right. Yeah. So scenario. Anthony Davis gets the max contract no matter what happens, except whether or not Anthony Davis plays, this All-Star game and the next has direct financial impact on how big that max contract is because of the Derrick Rose rule. It's in one world, he gets 5% more, and in another world, he gets, the standard max. And so... there's actually a huge financial impact for him not to be either voted in or selected in. I'm not sure what the criteria of the Derrick Rose rule, whether it was All-Star starter or...
It's 2 All-Star starts, 2 All-NBA teams, or 1 MVP.
And Rookie of the Year is not one of the factors? Because I thought that's why... Okay.
Derrick Rose got it because he got
clearly, the MVP. Clearly, like, it would be in a sick way, it would be in New Orleans' interest to somehow have him be injured during the All-Star game, because he will make 5% less money per year, which works out on a max contract that's going to work out to like $2 million a year, right?
You know what?
Well,
Another
hang on,
thing
no,
they
it's
could
terrible
do in
math. Like one and a half million
you're,
dollars.
you're close. Yeah, it's just depend. And also, don't forget the salary cap's about to boost. So what's funny is it
Yeah.
would be in New Orleans' best interest next season to basically spend $2 million on a campaign for whoever is close to Anthony Davis in votes.
Which is a sick incentive. But anyway, all we're really saying is that what the fans vote does actually matter in a stupid, weird kind of way. So it's okay to get a little bit upset about it. I mean, to some extent, you can't get too upset about it because I look at fans like my dad, and I could never expect my dad to make all-star voting choices that I thought were rational in any way, even by the average NBA fans sort of measurement.
Do you
Right?
guys
I'm
think
sure
that
my
the
dad's
league is thinking to themselves in the back of their heads, though, hey, you good players that aren't very marketable, maybe you guys should pick up your marketing, your Twitter games a little bit, and maybe they're giving them incentive to
That's
do
actually
that.
a really good point. Yeah. That's
But
a very good point.
the problem we run into there, and this has always bugged me, I tweeted this out earlier this week too, is I said, it's ridiculous the way the NBA picks markets, right? Like the NBA, regardless of what, I forget his last name, Clay, right? The OKC owner, regardless of what he said, the NBA should say, are you out of your mind? You want to move a team to Oklahoma City? No. Like
Yeah. I mean, Clay Bennett, you're talking about. Like
Clay Bennett,
the NBA should have been like, "You want to go where?
And
Fuck
recall
off! You can't take this." I mean, it's the equivalent of like I don't know. I can't. I'm trying to actually think of a good equivalent, but I guess one would be like if I came to McDonald's and said I want to buy a McDonald's franchise, and there's all kinds of things you have to do before you can franchise, but then one of the rules is, well, you got to put the McDonald's somewhere where people are actually going to come in and buy hamburgers. Because if you don't do that, we're not going to let you franchise. So if you came and said, yeah, I want to put it in like, some town of 120 people in North Dakota, they'd say, well, no, you can't do that because no one's going to go to your McDonald's and buy the burgers. Why would I let you do that?
I was going to give a shout out to my uncle. He lives in Lincoln, Montana, which had, and I think it's shrunk, I think had about 500 people. It's like right near the border of Canada in Montana. And by the way, Lincoln, Montana does not have a McDonald's.
I thought you were going to tell me it does and make me feel like a fool.
No. I mean, for your reason. I mean, like I would see no one would.
Yeah,
even
I mean, you probably got to drive to the nearest big city, and by big, I mean, I don't know, 20,000 people to get to a McDonald's, or one that's on a major freeway that goes through somewhere.
I hear on the weekends they go to Missoula, is what they say.
Yeah, now Missoula, I've been to Missoula. They got a McDonald's. Yeah. But no NBA franchises. If you wanted to take the Minnesota Timberwolves to Missoula, the NBA would laugh you, like if Glenn Taylor wanted to do that, they would just laugh him out of the room. But it's the same concept. Like the NBA, so Oklahoma lost millions of dollars a year by doing this. And by extension, so did the NBA. That's, it's, and it's funny because they're trying desperately hard to not pay luxury tax, which I think means that other teams pay them in the revenue sharing agreement, right?
Yeah.
So imagine what you must feel like if you're Mark Cuban and you're cutting a luxury tax check to fucking Clay Bennett because he wants to play in Oklahoma City. Why doesn't that piss you off? I don't understand why that doesn't really piss you off.
It shouldn't. And I mean, yeah, it's like, but then you have the All-Star game and you're like, let's get the best. And what that really means, right? One of the reasons Kobe Bryant is still voted in is because unless they keep up at this rate, and I think after the Kobe wave is passed, the Lakers will rebuild. But they're one of the most global brands because they've been one of the biggest franchises, one of the biggest markets forever. So the reason Kobe Bryant's voted in is that that's one of the biggest markets that people have been watching for years. And it's like, why on earth, if you're going to scatter teams all over the, North America at, willy-nilly, why are you then deciding the best people based on a popularity vote if clearly you didn't care about a popularity vote when you're placing the teams where they're at? Like, that to me is just silly.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's the reason Kobe Bryant gets voted in because, I mean, it doesn't seem to work for the Boston Celtics, who are arguably just as big a global brand, even though the last couple of years they haven't been winning, right? I mean, that's a huge global brand, but you don't see.
Well, who do they have?
I can't even think of who would be worthy of a vote there.
I was going to say
who would be worthy of an All-Star vote, but who is Boston's top scorer? I don't even know. It's got to be something horrible like Avery Bradley or somebody who's got more shots than points.
But I was going to say, who do they have who do they have on Boston? I'm actually looking at voting results, but they don't have any legacies, right?
They
Like
don't have any legacies.
everybody's
but I mean,
gone.
what I'm saying is that it didn't help Rajon Rondo, right? I mean, he didn't get lots of votes, and I mean, maybe it arguably helped Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett when they were there, but those guys were still kind of, they were still solid performers in the East. It wasn't like they were outrageous. I mean, if you look objectively, if you look at Kobe Bryant, it's hard for me to look back in history and point at an all-star selection that was worse in terms of not being anywhere close to an all-star and yet voted in. Like just to being like not just not an all-star, but being actively a terrible player who cost his team wins and yet being voted into the all-star game. I would have to actually consult the database.
I think I've got one for you, and I think it's kind of funny if we go based on Lakers again. Although it's kind of funny if you've read the book.
Do you think it was Kareem in his last season? I bet it was.
But I was going to say, if you read the book, The Showtime Lakers, kind of what was very depressing is Kareem, most of his career. So 1980, I'm curious if the 1989 one he was actually voted in first. But so Kareem, like his last season, basically he knew he was retiring, right? He announced his retirement before the season. Everybody kind of knew he was out. Everybody knew he wasn't productive. And it was actually kind of depressing because he was hoping that people were going to like give him accolades. Like there's an entire chapter in this book, The Showtime Lakers, where he's like going around and having like retirement ceremonies at various, stadiums and arenas. And it's just kind of a sad thing because, he didn't start, by the way. He was a backup. So never mind. I'll have to look further. But anyway, on that note, we just mentioned Kobe Bryant. So I could talk Showtime Lakers forever, but actually said we're going to talk the All-Star game. The East is not who we're going to go with. We're going to go with the West because we're talking Kobe. So I had the East queued first. But beyond Kobe, this is interesting. So I've got two questions. Blake Griffin is not really an all-star this season, but how much weight do you give to previous season's performance? Because he's having a much worse season than he had last season.
Yeah, I think with Blake Griffin, the thing that always strikes me is, ever since he came in the league as a rookie and he was so flashy and he had all those dunks and he was, is very solid, very good player. And there was always this promise of how good is he going to be once he gets it all, once he figures it all out. And I think we're still waiting for that. And I think people still evaluate Blake Griffin based on that. Like, man, once he figures it all out, he's going to be a real superstar. When in reality, he still is very good at a few things and doesn't have the complete package. Still hasn't developed the complete package. And I think it's a very big open question mark whether he ever will, because at some point, players are who they are, and they don't really change very much. And Blake Griffin's now, 27?
Yeah, is he injured or anything though? Because he has regressed this year.
He kind of looks like maybe his back is hurting or something. I mean, he doesn't look like the player he used to be. That's for sure.
I think he did have a preseason injury. I can look that up.
Wasn't there something about a hernia or a slipped disc or a back?
He sat out of the Olympics, remember? And I think he said he had like a small fracture, but it wasn't serious.
He definitely doesn't look like the player he used to be, and that could be injury related. But even if we look at him last year, he wasn't the best big man on the Clippers, much less the best big man in his conference or in the West. So I always felt like he gets the All-Star nod because of the, the violent dunks and the sort of, kind of like Vince Carter, who was in the All-Star game for years and years beyond the time when he actually was like this crazy, flashy, athletic, dominant guy. And Vince Carter, I don't think ever really lived up to the hype. I mean, he's obviously been a productive and good player for a long time, but I don't think he ever really quite lived up to, the mantle of the next Jordan, I guess, was kind of over his head for a long time.
Can I step in one more time here, Dre?
Go for it.
So do you think that he's maybe getting credit for the Clippers having a successful record, and maybe he's stealing some of the DeAndre Jordan, Chris Paul credit? Because I've got the team stats up right now, and Paul and Jordan are just producing ludicrous numbers of wins. Yeah. 11 and more than 11 both. And then Griffin is third with less than 4, so he's probably getting some of that credit.
Yeah, I think he's getting a lot of that credit.
Do you want to hear something kind of crazy about like the Vince Carter comparison you made? Is his third season, he basically matched Blake Griffin's third season's wins per 48, and then had a drop off the season after. It's crazy. So that's one of the most strikingly weird comparisons I've ever seen, where you've literally picked a player whose curve
I wasn't
for the
talking
first.
about their similarities as players at all. By the
I
way,
know, and that's what
anyone
I'm
jumps
saying.
on that bandwagon. But just, I mean, like Vince Carter was good and is good and went on to have a good, great, even maybe career. But I think everyone, when he was a rookie or second or third year, everyone thought he would go on to have like a surefire Hall of Fame career. And honestly, if if in 5 years when he's on the ballot, is he first ballot Hall of Fame? Because I don't think so, right? And I think that I mean, I guess I'm talking about the disparity between his perceived stardom and he was very good but not very great. And I think the same thing has happened to Blake Griffin, where there's this perception that he's great and he's dominant, when in reality he's just a real solid guy, really good side, looks spectacular in certain ways, but isn't really dominant.
And then to Bryant,
and certainly there's many better big men in front of him in the West.
And then to Brian's point about like the Clippers, right? They're a good team, and it's really like we spent the whole pre-show and a lot of the early show talking. It's like people have a hard time divorcing what makes teams good, and so the Clippers, right? The Clippers, like Brian just said, right? They have DeAndre Jordan, who we talk Short Corner podcast. I think DeAndre Jordan and actually Tyson Chandler are two of these players that are very good, but people hate that they're good because they're not good in the way that the flashy dunker you just talked about with Vince Carter or Blake Griffin. We hate that the fact that you're just very tall and you're near the hoop and good at that, right?
Actually, that's really funny that you bring that up, because Paul Shirley was talking about just this last podcast, and I think it's this thing where people who were like 6'5" and played basketball in college, they look at a guy like Tyson Chandler or DeAndre Jordan, and they look at him and they say, "God damn, if I'd been as tall as you, I would have been Wilt fucking Chamberlain. Like, yeah. I was amazing, and if I was that tall, I'd have been great." And it's complete bullshit, for one thing. The one thing I love is, like, you look at the way, because one of the things that DeAndre Jordan and Tyson Chandler and even Brandon Wright, what they have in common is they are great receivers of alley-oop passes. Like, they get a lot of points just from Chris Paul or Dragan Goric or Rajon Rondo or whomever getting the ball in the right position for a dunk. And so everyone looks at it and says, that's really easy. And to which I answer is like, no, it's not, because if that were really easy, like, there's a lot of like 6'10" to 7-foot players in the NBA, and not very many of them get like 4 dunks a game from their point guard. It's because it's really hard to run at the hoop and to have that timing with your teammate and to recognize how your defender is guarding you and make cuts in the right way. And it's kind of like what we talked about with Kyle Korver last week, is like, reading the defense and reacting and running to the hoop hard and at the right time is not easy. There's nothing easy about that. And I mean, to suggest that it would be easy just flies in the face of all the evidence, basically. So they're really good at a couple of skills that people perceive to be easy, even though they're not easy at all. And so I think that's why they get like kind of a bad rep.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with that completely, but that's just another thing in the All-Star game. I mean, we didn't really plan this out. So one of the players we just talked about that doesn't really belong in the All-Star game was Blake Griffin. I think the obvious, who would we replace that player with? I think we've made a very clear. Actually, who do you take? Do you take DeAndre Jordan or Tyson Chandler?
I was writing up my my obligatory who would I pick article, and I picked Tyson Chandler, but it's completely, entirely, 100% subjective. I think numerically these guys are practically identical. I picked him because of the championship pedigree, the fact that I think he's more important to Dallas than Jordan is to the Clippers. There's these intangibles on defense, I guess. I just picked, but honestly, if you told me I'm full of shit and you wanted to swap Jordan for Chandler, I'd be okay. Yeah, fine.
By the way, I'm cheating and looking at your post. You as the coaches, so Patrick as the fan, which this seems perfectly reasonable. Patrick as the fan picks Tyson Chandler. Patrick as the coach picks DeAndre Jordan. So you've got your bases covered in that article.
That's pretty much the way it works.
So, okay, so that's the first one. We didn't really talk this. Obviously, we bashed Kobe to heck and kind of mentioned our thing, compared him to Kareem. This one should be easy. Actually, you can pick from your own. I don't want to steal all your thunder on your piece, which is coming up. So, who would you replace Kobe with? And I know I've got your piece in front of me, so I know the answer. But this one I agree with. And he's a backcourt, so the one of the players you've got would count as a front court.
I'm sorry. I'm blanking here because the starters already are
Steph Curry and Kobe. And Kobe. It's the backcourt. And so you actually agree with.
So the obvious
agree with Steph.
Yeah. So Steph Curry is like the number one, but I get confused because my system is like point guard plus 2 wings plus 2 bigs, and the NBA system is different. So anyway, I would pick James Harden. I think that's the easy choice here. If you look at his numbers, it's just, I mean, the knock against James Harden is everybody thinks that play style is ugly. Watching the guy, Euro step to the free throw line 12 times a game, but it's spectacularly effective. And so he deserves to be in that spot. I mean, he's putting up pretty insane numbers, and he's having career highs in all of the non-shooting areas too. Like he's setting career highs in rebounds and assists and steals, I think, this year. So, and those were things he was already pretty good at.
So, by the way, and someone like trotted out that when Kobe Bryant won the MVP, his stat line looked very similar to James Harden. The difference being, and this is a subtle difference, and I can buy why people didn't want to see it, their field goal percentage shooting is about the same, but James Harden's three-point shooting is about 3% better than Kobe's. So Kobe and James Harden both shot 46% from the field, but James Harden shot 39% from three. Kobe Bryant in 2008, his MVP season, 36. And that 3% difference in three-point shooting is huge. And anybody who doesn't realize that, you're lying to yourself.
Yeah, so James Harden's true shooting percentage, I think it's 61.5 or something like that, whereas Kobe in his MVP season was 58, I think.
Yeah. Is that right? I mean, that sounds correct.
I'm pulling that right out of my head.
Yeah, 61.6 currently for Harden.
And then Kobe Bryant in 2008. I should have just let you do this, Brian, but I jumped in head first without a net, but it was a 57.6.
But Flying Walendas don't use nets, Dre.
All right.
So, I mean, yeah, James Harden is, and even if you go by silly criteria, like he's a leading scorer on a great team. Okay. I mean, James Harden to me is the easy choice to replace Kobe Bryant.
Let's hope the league agrees with you. Now, this one gets interesting because the NBA, and actually, even if we were to look at the wins produced stars, and I think we veered off course from that, Brian, so apologies because I had that chart already. But you actually went with a wing instead of, whereas the NBA, the voters, and I think our numbers would put in that front court would put 3 bigs. This player I could kind of count, but the player I think you would swap out Marc Gasol, which is weird. And actually, we should talk a little bit about that. We don't hate Marc Gasol, but first off, we don't think he's as great. Do you think, how much of a boost do you think defensive numbers give him because obviously the wins produced, we even it out a little more than what he gets.
Sorry, you lost me a little bit because my audio and my headphones went out a little bit, so I missed the middle part.
Okay, I was just saying, Marc Gasol, according to our numbers, pretty much just like Blake Griffin. We think he's a good player. He's had some shining moments in his career where you maybe thought he was going to turn into a star, but we haven't quite seen that be consistent. This year, we think he's an okay player, but we don't think he's a star. And my question to you is, first off, what are your thoughts on him not belonging in the All-Star game or not? And second, do you happen to think there's anything to defense in his game that might push him a little higher than we think? Because, for instance, they're not even that great. The Grizzlies are the 11th best defense in the league.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think when it comes to Memphis, Mike Conley doesn't get nearly enough credit for how much he impacts that team. Nor, if you're going to talk about great defense, do guys like Tony Allen get. And I think Zach Randolph's actually having a really great year too. I don't see it. I mean, you can make all kinds of arguments for the intangible things he does well on defense, but I think the primary reason the voters are voting for him and the fans all think he's having an MVP season is because his shot attempts are up. His efficiency is about the same, but he's shooting more shots, so he's getting more credit for the success of the team. I think Mike Conley is a huge key to that team, and Yeah, and I mean, there's no doubt Marc Gasol is important, but I wouldn't say he's good enough to be an all-star.
Patrick,
And
I
I've
guess
got the stats up for Memphis right now, and he is producing the least amount of wins for all 5 of their starters. Conley, Lee, Randolph, and Allen are all doing better than him this season.
yeah, Malcolm Lee's having kind of a crazy season. I mean, he's the Kyle Korver of
Courtney
the
Lee
West,
is
isn't he?
the one on Memphis.
Sorry, Courtney Lee.
Yeah.
That's what Malcolm Lee's the guy who didn't quite make it in Minnesota, and
Yep.
now he's in Philadelphia. I think. I'm not sure.
That sounds right.
Not the same at all. Yeah, I mean again, I think Conley is kind of the motor to that engine. No, that's a terrible metaphor. He's the engine kind of that makes that locomotive run. I like Marc Gasol, but I can think of 4 big men in the West, and in fact, I did think of 4 big men and put them above him in my rankings.
But for your starter, actually, you selected a wing, so it was kind of weird. I put you Chandler, but I mean, you were basically replacing 2 bigs. So
Yeah.
you replace Marc Gasol, or actually, I would say this is more accurate. You replace Blake Griffin with,
Kevin Durant.
yeah, that
Right.
doesn't. The only
Wait.
question I have for you there is health, because right, he hasn't played a complete season, right? He's been out a significant amount of time.
He's been out a significant time, but he's been back long enough to qualify for the All-Star game, in my opinion. And if you look at him, like, his true shooting is actually better than last year when he was shattering records for the combination of true shooting and usage rate, right? Last year, we've talked about this before. Last year, he was the only player since Adrian Dantley to shoot above 60% true shooting on, what was it, 20 attempts per 48 minutes or something like that, some threshold, right? And that was above 60. And he and Adrian Dantley were the only ones in our database since 1978. And the difference is that Durant was actually 2 percentage points better than Dantley. And, for obvious reasons, Dantley couldn't shoot threes. So I don't want to belittle Adrian Dantley's accomplishments because he's one of my favorite all-time historical players. But I mean, I think that what Durant did last year offensively is a season for the ages. And it kind of looks like he's even better in his limited time this year. Like, if you look at the numbers, if Durant were playing and had not had that injury at the beginning, and you just extrapolated those numbers over a full half of the season, he would be an easy lock for an MVP repeat. Easy.
And then the other thing we were talking kind of weird. I obviously won't get the MVP because the voters like players that have played a lot of minutes, but it's like the All-Star question where we said how much last year. Obviously, since you start voting for the All-Star game at the beginning of the year and he had a thing for the ages, I can see, to your point there, saying last season should impact some, especially since he's kept it up this season.
Well, let me put it this way. I have another player on my list who doesn't have as many minutes as the average starter, but for different reasons, which is Rudy Gobert. And I don't think the number of minutes you played, as long as it's above a certain threshold, I don't think the number of minutes you played should really prevent you from being an all-star.
Patrick, I have those numbers up right now, too. Sorry to jump in again.
So Rudy Gobert, this is a fun fact. Rudy Gobert is averaging more blocks than fouls. And if you go back in Basketball Reference and look at like all the players who have done that, who have played more than X minutes, it's a list of Hall of Famers. Man, it's Bill Walton and Dikembe Mutombo and David Robinson, and it's just Hall of Famers up and down. Like and some sort of crazy shot blockers like Larry Nance and stuff like that. It's a really amazing accomplishment. And the only reason Gobert's not in All-Star talks, well, it's really the same reason as Hassan Whiteside. The only reason is minutes. Like if he had a full starter's season's worth of minutes under his belt, he'd be in the conversation for sure.
Dre,
what
go
were you
ahead.
going to say? I was actually sorry. We're doing the same thing, Brian. So what were you going to say, Brian? Because you were going to jump in with more fun stats too.
Yeah, no, just that I have the database up right now, and sorting by WP48 for all players who qualify for the minute minimum, which is 400 right now, I believe, something like that. Durant and Gobert are both in the top 8 for WP48.
Yeah, it's 440 for our stat for the database, but I used 500 when I was deciding on my threshold for who to pick.
They are 7th and 8th with all the guys we talked about ahead of them before them: Paul Harden, Curry Davis, Jordan Chandler. Pretty impressive.
He's underappreciated up there with Brandon Wright. Okay,
Yep.
I'll save the reserves because we've got Patrick, the coach, for the actual article that comes out. So let's hop over to the East is a little easier is the nice part, I think. Because the West, we had essentially three players that we don't think belong, even if we don't agree, even if like the best wins produced players don't agree with all of the players in the East, all of them except for one of these players is not like the other, does qualify as an all-star in the East. So the East was selected. It was John Wall and Kyle Lowry in the backcourt, Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, and Pau Gasol in the front court. And this shouldn't be a surprise. If you're listening to this show, listening to this podcast, reading the box score Geeks, the name that should stand out as obviously not belonging this year is Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah. I mean, I think I should just let you talk about this guy. You have a long history with Carmelo.
I mean, it's to your point, Carmelo Anthony has his entire career pulled the trick of being the most flashy player on some good teams, and now that's gone. And one of the commenters, I was debating pre-show, I think when I was talking to you guys about going off on one of the comments that kind of just hit one of my pet peeves that, you know, I may have to put a fact or something up to basically say against this to start just deleting these comments. So Josepho, however you say that, brought up this discussion I got into with Mark Cuban years ago where I chastised Mark Cuban for picking up Chris Kaman and went with the like, you couldn't have just a team of all these players. And what we pointed out at the start of the show was, yeah, but you do need to construct a team with roles in mind. But when the Mavericks won in 2011, they selected some of the best, if you want to call them role, I find that very diminutive. They got some of the best players. They got, you know, Jason Kidd, Tyson Chandler, Dirk Nowitzki, Sean Marion. They got all these great players together that all fit their roles really well and played together really well. And that's why they won a title. And then guess what happened? Some of these role players quit and went to New York and made Melo look really good briefly. And so Melo's just always had that. You know, people don't seem to get that he's played on some really, really good teams with some players that are really, really good. He's not bad. Like, that's the thing. Melo, to me, the most hilarious part about him in New York is he has played his best basketball in New York. And I've argued this before. Like, if New York, when they looked at his numbers in Denver and decided to give him that contract, and then looked at his numbers in New York and decided to give him the extension, he's lived up to the hype that he should have. He's just never been that good. And the problem now with the Knicks is if you're giving all of your money to Melo and Amari Stoudemire, you're probably not going to have money for a good team unless you luck into, you know, Tyson Chandler and Jason Kidd, and they're both gone. So, you know, the fact that he's still living off the reputation of playing on some good teams a few years ago with Jason Kidd and Tyson Chandler, of those great Nuggets teams that underperformed in the playoffs because George Karl is one of the worst playoff coaches in the history of the NBA. You and I both have a history. He took some of the best Sonics teams and they underperformed in the playoffs. He took some of the best Nuggets teams, they underperformed in the playoffs, and he's going to get into the Hall of Fame before the players that made those teams really good, which is depressing to me. So that's all I got. I mean, yeah. Melo has no business on this list.
Yeah, I honestly don't understand why the fans voted him in this year with all the choices there are in the East. I mean, New York has been awful, and there's been, you know, Anthony sat out for a few weeks at some point. I really don't know who's voting for Carmelo Anthony.
A lot of people live there.
Sure, but even the people in New York, I mean, I got to be thinking, wow.
At least they're loyal, if not good basketball judges.
Yeah. I really don't. I mean, yeah, Carmelo Anthony is clearly not the power forward who should be starting in the East.
The problem I have is the player I would love to put in the East doesn't qualify. Like, we can't actually, I'm going to get this up in front of me, but, you know, the player I would love to have in the East above Carmelo Anthony, I just don't think gets the love, would actually be Jimmy Butler. He has been huge. I think it would be nice to have him in there with Pau Gasol, right? Two Bulls. The player that we think should be swapped out, and this actually isn't hard at all, is Andre Drummond. The three front court, we think LeBron James is spot on. Pau Gasol, we agree 100% with. And by the way, just look at the negative impact Kobe apparently has on big men. Like, if you're a healthy big, as long as you stay healthy, right?
Let's not blame that on Kobe. I think we can blame that on Mr. D'Antoni.
Fair enough. Okay, let's say that. Clearly, Pau Gasol was not happy, and it could have been health, it could have been other things, but on the short corner...
Didn't he even admit recently that he was dogging it in LA where he just didn't care?
Yeah, they brought that up on the Short Corner podcast. And I mean, I can completely buy that. He wasn't getting the shots he deserved. He wasn't getting the respect he deserved. He goes to
Yeah.
Chicago where they actually understand how, they go to a team that hasn't been like winning titles every year for the last decade. And he goes there and they're like, oh, thank God you're here. We've been living with the Derrick Rose person for years. So,
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I disagree with you. I think Jimmy Butler 100% absolutely positively should be a starter.
but I'm saying I can't swap him in for Melo is the issue, is what I'm saying.
No, but I mean, why can't we swap him in for Kyle Lowry? Not that Kyle Lowry doesn't deserve to be an all-star, but if I'm voting for the starters, I'm going to pick John Wall and Kyle Lowry in the backcourt. And and Jimmy Butler in the backcourt. And Kyle Lowry would be like, obviously my top reserve. I mean, and I think the Kyle Lowry versus John Wall debate, to me, it's like the debate between Tyson Chandler and DeAndre Jordan. It's not that I'm saying, John Wall's way better than Kyle Lowry. It's just I'm picking him because the Wizards seem slightly better to me, and he seems more important to the Wizards' success. Although, as I'm saying that now, I'm thinking, well, that's kind of ridiculous because it's hard to think of who else on Toronto is really running things. But, and you kind of look at how Toronto has slumped a bit in the last month. I'd just give John Wall the edge. But that's, again, like a purely, like I think as you put it, maybe that's the fan versus the coach kind of thing going on. And I'm saying I got to make 2 starting spots. And there's no fucking way I can leave Jimmy Butler off of my starting 5 in the East. There's no way. He's by far the best guard in the East, and it's not particularly close.
I really like that logic, and I actually I'm cool with the John Wall pick and then putting Kyle Lowry as a reserve. And then the other question I have for you then is, okay, so LeBron and Pau, any complaints? I mean, the numbers say it, the fans say it. I have no problem with that.
I have no problem with that either. I think LeBron and Pau are both all-stars. I mean, we go back to the injury thing again, I guess, but I think you could give some love for like Jonas Valanciunas. I can never fucking pronounce his name. Valanciunas. I'm not sure.
I do believe it's
Valanciunas. I think he's having a good year. But for the most part, like I think Pau and LeBron is, pretty damn straightforward.
And then the numbers say Andre Drummond takes that third forward spot. Do you have someone you prefer there?
Well, okay. I mean, Andre Drummond is a center, right? And I kind of hate this like 3 forwards thing, but yeah, Drummond is absolutely should be a starter.
What the heck? Okay, apparently I tried to do a control find and Skype tried to dial a number with that, so that's why I just went with that. All right.
Wait, are my headphones connected to my cell phone?
Yeah. So we've gone through. We've actually gone through all of the starters in the games. We've given some of that. We've gone on some tangents. We're running out of time. Okay. So
we're forgetting a couple things.
What do we got?
The Hawks are the best team in the East. Now, you and I don't believe they have no all-stars.
We do,
so
actually.
Where do Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver fit into this equation? Because they both need to be playing in the All-Star game, right?
But are you okay with reserves? Or, I mean, that's my question to you.
Well, I don't know who they're going to name as reserves, but I do know that if Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver aren't both named, I'm going to say, what the fuck are you all smoking?
Well, I'm okay with
agree there?
I'm okay with them as reserves. I mean, I think
hell. I mean, I would love to find a way to start Kyle Korver, to be honest, because I think he's been absolutely amazing. I would love to find a way, but it's hard for me to I mean, I can't kick out LeBron because, I mean, even though LeBron is having for him a subpar season, he's still having a great season. And he, I mean, as great as I think Kyle Korver is, you just can't argue with the fact that LeBron is great all around. He just does everything well, and he's so important to that team.
You got it, man. Can you put LeBron? Actually, no. This is the East is freaking rough because the other thing is you can put LeBron in your backcourt. I mean,
that's a good point. Why don't we start LeBron at point guard? We'll bump John Wall into the reserves, and Kyle Korver becomes our starting small forward. Or, between Korver and Jimmy Butler, they can duke it out and figure out who plays forward and who plays guard, small forward, guard. They're kind of both pretty equivalent at both positions, right? So we'll start LeBron at point guard. Butler and Korver are our wings, and then our 2 bigs are Pau and Drummond, and that's a pretty damn good team.
I love it, and
the problem we have though is then we have 3 point guards in our reserves because we got to get Jeff Teague on this team too, right?
Well, I mean,
that's
I've got one of the things I've always thought would be fun, and this will never happen, but because of timeout rules, you can't do this. But I would love to see a way in basketball to do like line change rules, and that would be hilarious in the All-Star game.
You mean like
Just
hockey style?
Yeah, like it would actually be interesting if there were rules like if when you were allowed to, there are rules about when you're allowed to have if you have too many people on the court, that's a problem. But I would love if you had possession of the ball and were in the front court, if you were allowed to have multiple players at the same position in the back court to like swap out. So like you could
as long as both players were in the back court during the swap and the ball was in the front court kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
That would be, and I would be okay with that. I have no problem with that. I mean, we've seen, I think at one point, one All-Star game, there were 5 7-footers on the West. And the coach, I forget who the coach at the time, put all of them in the game. The All-Star game is somewhat spectacle. We want the best players. And I think the whole first start of the show was talking about changing the definition of a star. And so to that point, I actually go, that's cold, Brian, by the way. I'm looking at the notes because we're about to go to shout outs. Brian's got a cold one. But yeah, we've got no problem with some of the spectacle and including some of these great players. Yeah, Jeff Teague belongs in the All-Star game. For those of you listening, yeah, you've got to put Teague and Korver as the reserves and put them in the game together at some point, because to not do it is just to give a disservice to the Hawks.
What about Royal Rumble rules, Dre? A few guys come in every few minutes until everyone's on the court.
Interesting. All right.
We could have them play a giant game of 21. You guys are not 21. You guys ever play the game where you line up at the free throw line? If you hit the shot, you get 2 points. If you catch your ball before it hits the ground, you can shoot a layup, so that's a possible 3 points. But if the guy behind you has a ball too, and if the guy behind you gets his ball in before your second shot, you're out.
Oh, is that game called Poison?
You gotta land.
It's called Knockout.
Oh, Knockout. Okay.
Okay. Let's just have a giant game of fucking knockout with all the All-Stars.
It would be better than the other things, I'll tell you that.
Would you imagine being the poor sap who has to be right in front of Kyle Korver? You're like, fuck. I'm going to catch my rebound really fast.
All right. So do we have anything more to go on before shoutouts? Because we're right about at time, and I would love to get us, I would feel so proud of us if we hit time.
Oh, no, let's hit time. Let's do our shout-outs.
All right, so our shout-outs, I've got a few. One of them is snarky. The WWE pulled one of our old videos. Brian told us that before the show. Apparently, we were using too many wrestling clips, so we'll figure out a way around that in the future. But thank you, WWE.
Shout out to Vince McMahon.
Clearly, the 10 seconds of Brian playing Mick Foley falling off a cage during a podcast needed to be pulled. My other shout out is to Jones on the NBA, Nate Jones. If you don't follow him, he tweeted this right at me. He didn't do the dot in front of the name. And I know why he did that. And that's because if you're following me and you're not following Nate Jones, you're a fool. One of the best basketball followers on the NBA, on Twitter. He said, when we were talking to Andrew Wiggins, he said, throwing a 19-year-old in the NBA is like dropping a puppy in the middle of the jungle. Couldn't agree more. Great metaphor. And you talked about that a lot last week, Patrick. So loved that. Last shout out is to Jay Brett, who has finally started gracing our comments with gusto. He was really big on the Wages of Wins forum. Dave named some things the Jay Brett codes. Love it that I don't have to, argue with everybody, and Jay Brett explains stuff well. He's also a Lakers fan. He's a Laker and Kobe fan and still does this. So thank you, Jay Brett.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what I got there.
He's a Kobe fan and he still listens to us.
He understands. He understands. Chris Ye is the same way. So, Patrick, do you have anybody to shout out?
I'd like to shout out to Ethan Sherwood Strauss, who's a true hoop writer. He was really fun to watch yesterday and the day before when Klay Thompson went off, and he had a great tweet about this would be a great time for me to talk about all those idiots who said who said that Klay should have been traded for Kevin Love. Oh, except for that part where I was one of those idiots. And I had to retweet that because I felt exactly the same way. I was like, I'd like right now to rant and rave about all those fools who in Golden State who said, yeah, let's keep Klay Thompson. We don't need Kevin Love. Except, oh yeah, I was one of those guys. And I still think they should have traded him because, especially with David Lee, because if you swap out Kevin Love and David Lee, and then you get Kevin Love and Steph Curry playing together, I think amazing things happen. But clearly it's working out for them. And yeah, maybe Steve Kerr and co, maybe they knew some things that we didn't know. I think that's the thing. They had internal information about what they were going to do with Klay Thompson. So yeah, so let's shout out to Steve Kerr because.
And how about Klay
Thompson
doing all the
things
37 points?
saying.
How about
What's
Clay
that?
too? Clay deserves a shout out for 37 points in one
Yeah,
quarter.
but Clay's got enough people shouting out to him. He doesn't
All
need my
right,
shout
fair
out,
enough.
right? But I mean, Steve
Wow.
Kerr's got like Klay Thompson basically doing all the things that we complained about for years. When people called Klay Thompson great, we were like, well, he's not really great because he takes a bunch of shitty shots in the mid range. And when you look at his shot chart this year, they're not completely eliminated, but there's a lot less of them. And you got to, I mean, in the absence of any further information, I'm going to chalk that up to coaching. I mean, I guess it's possible that Stephen Curry and Draymond Green took him aside and said, "Hey, dude, stop with the long twos." But I think it's more likely it's coaching. So
Awesome. All right, and you have a few too, Brian, as well. The first one, as I mentioned, is kind of cold.
Oh, it wasn't supposed to be cold. Just that Sean Marion announced he's retiring, and he's just one of my favorite players watching for all these years. So, congratulations on a great
Matrix.
career to the Matrix. Yeah. And another kind of career shout out I had. David Lee scored 10,000 career points. I do like longevity stuff to some extent. I know we don't care about points per game, but he's been very consistent. He's been up there 55, 60% true shooting. Pretty good offensive player for all the shit we give him. So sorry, David Lee. Good job on 10,000 points. My last one was also to a commenter as well, Disc Nerd, who said that maybe the problem is basically that people think points are worth more just because you get 2 of them per shot. Maybe if you half the number, people would understand how much they're worth compared to rebounds and steals and whatnot.
playground rules, baby, ones and twos.
Pretty
That's what
obvious
makes
thing to
it
say,
difference.
but I think it made a lot of sense to me. Maybe that is the problem. The 20 is just more than 5 or 10. I don't know.
I agree, and that's like hockey, right? Hockey counts assists and goals the same, and that means a lot of players. Basically Wayne Gretzky had more assists than points by a huge margin, but people give the credit. So he's a bad example because he blew all the numbers. Like he breaks the scale. So sorry, that's a horrible metaphor there.
Also had a lot of longevity.
He was that too. But okay, so with that said, we went a little over, but that's fine. Thank you so much. One last note on Sean Marion. If he's not voted first ballot, you got 5 years. 5 years on the clock starting the end of the season. Voters, he's a first ballot. You don't put him there, you're wrong.
Gotta be first ballot.
Yep. So with that said, hope you enjoyed our thoughts on the All-Star game. Put your thoughts in the comments if you disagree. Make sure to subscribe to channel Nerd Numbers, and we actually do have a Boxscore Geek playlist, so make sure to go for that. And subscribe to iTunes as well. Like us there. That's all my shilling. And with that said, we'll see you next week.